this evening is somebody I just love having on. He's been on before, and his name is Dan Willis, and I know everybody knows who he is. Let me get you his bio here. In a world that has become trapped in a lie, where we are led to believe that we need oil and gasoline for our transportation, dangerously polluting nuclear and coal power plants for our electricity, and that the only way to overcome gravity is through the use of rocket fuel, there exist hidden technologies which remain hidden only through the use of perception management of the masses, or these lies are able to be perpetuated at a cost to all humanity and our planet. It appears that only through a global conscious awakening of the controlled indoctrination that the human race has been subjected to can we expose these hidden advanced technologies for the benefit of all humanity. There are indications in our ancient past, during the times of Atlantis and beyond, that in vastly superior technology existed that understood the geometrical structure of matter in time and space and its interface with that of consciousness. Dan Willis worked with IBM's head scientist, Dr. Marcel Vogel, in the 1980s to explore the geometrical interface of consciousness and matter in a laboratory, which the research gave indicators of this science that could lay down the foundation for a science of the future. Dan is also one of the top secret military witnesses that testified in front of a major media at the National Press Club in May of 2001 in support of the release the hidden advanced extraterrestrial derived technologies within the secret government unacknowledged black projects. Since the controlled mainstream media sanitized the information so as to not alert the public, and the Bush administration denied the requested congressional hearing, which was backed by over 450 military and intelligence witnesses, an effort was initiated to meet with scientists around the world to bring out suppressed technologies. Dan spent over 10 years in this effort and experienced directly the purposeful suppression of these advanced technologies firsthand. His website is thewebmatrix.net/disclosure, and I encourage everybody to take a good look. There's also www.marcelvogel.org, and that's VOGEL. And please welcome Dan to the show this evening. Hello, Dan.
Solaris, greetings.
Greetings.
Good to be on your show again.
Oh, it's wonderful to have you on. You're just a blessing to everybody. So how have you been? What have you been up to?
I've been traveling on the road for several days through California and not getting a whole lot of sleep, but I hope I can pull this off tonight.
Okay. I'm really happy you're on tonight. Yeah, if you need anything, just give me a shout. Of course, it's always good to have a cup of coffee, but we'll get through it. And it's a pleasure to have you on, and I'm sure we'll get some momentum building here tonight, too. And I know we have a lot of topics to discuss tonight, because we kind of touched off here what we were going to kind of communicate about. Where would you like to start?
Well, maybe somewhat chronologically, in the past in the work, in the 1980s when I worked with Dr. Vogel, it was kind of an indication of a future science and all the things that were discovered. And then maybe in the latter part of the show, we'll go into present day and what's been happening with these sciences and all the indicators that have been, hidden from us.
That's right, obfuscated for sure. So why don't we start in letting everybody know how you met Marcel Vogel? How did you meet him?
Well, it's kind of interesting. I had an ET experience that, make a long story short, sort of like a high-speed download about geometry and consciousness, where this being I never seen a gray before. This was like 1977, and this being with a very large head and large loving eyes was like teaching me something. It was like a Kundalini opening experience. And the being projected in space a sphere, and as I observed the sphere, I saw looked like a six-pointed star tetrahedron formed, and then another geometry formed inside that one, another one within that one, and it kept on going into infinity, and then turned back into the perfect sphere. And I'm still decoding this to this day, Solaris. What this whole thing meant. I had never seen what people are commonly know as a gray back then. I had no idea about this. I had no idea. I didn't take geometry in school. I had no idea about geometry and how different geometrical forms fit inside of each other. It was almost like a confirmation afterward that I had this burning desire to grab every book I could to try to decode what this experience was about. And I started finding out afterward that oh wow! Look at this. The Pythagorean geometric solids. one fits the tetrahedron into the hexahedron, into the isosahedron, into the decahedron, and they all, where the points of each platonic solid fits into the next geometry, into the next geometry, and it can go into infinity, which is sort of a confirmation that I had. It was kind of interesting, and and essentially what I gathered from this experience is that each one of us in totality, in actuality, is a perfect sphere where we contain all of the harmonics of all the vibrations, and depending on a degree of evolution where we are, we can become aware of the sub-levels, but not the higher levels, and only through love we're able to transcend into the next higher level. And I shared this. We had a meeting after we did the press conference. I met with a bunch of scientists in San Francisco that had horror stories about guys coming in with electric motorcycles with night vision goggles and coming in, cleaning out their laboratories, and all these different scientists and everything in this little private meeting were there. And one of the scientists, Nassim Haramein, who has gotten some amazing recognition of some of his out-of-the-box understanding of the geometry of the structure of the universe, I shared with him what I experienced, and he says, "Yes, that's it. That's how it works." It's sort of interesting. And later, as I start to research, as the years go by, this experience always left an impact with me. In fact, back in that time, there wasn't anybody who was really doing a whole lot with deep scientific research about consciousness interfacing with geometry. And I heard of the work of Dr. Vogel, who he was written up in the book The Secret Life of Plants, where he was IBM's head scientist. That he developed, he had like 140 some patents. He developed the red and blue phosphors for television, the magnetic coating for hard drives, liquid crystals. I mean, an incredible genius. He's the kind of mind that once you've got a question, he will be relentless in pursuing the answer tirelessly. And so this whole thing started with he had to do a course of creativity for the engineers at IBM. Had 35 engineers, and he was reading in Fate magazine about Cleve Baxter, who was a polygraph expert with the CIA, that was hooking up plants, and noticed that people would come in, and one person would trash the plants around, and then other people would come in and then no reaction, but that one person would come back in, and the script chart recorder would squiggle, and so Marcel read that, and he thought it was total garbage, and crumpled it up and threw it in the trash. And he thought, well, this would be a good one for the engineers, So I thought I'd set it up, he thought. So he set up a script chart recorder. He put a split leaf philodendron plant in his lab, and he burned the leaf, and the chart recorder did a squiggle. And then as soon as the thought formed in his mind to burn the plant, the plant responded and squiggled, and he said that squiggle changed his whole life. And then this woman showed him this crystal, and he thought, oh man, no more woo-woo stuff. And then he found out he could amplify the thought. And one of his coworkers at IBM, he was able to heal his back, and so he worked with this for a long time, and I won't go into the whole story, but he had a dream and a vision of the crystal cut in the form of the Kabbalistic tree of life, the Kabbalah, where one is like the male and female, or the unmanifest and manifest, and acts as a laser. And he worked with about 24 medical doctors in the Bay Area and had amazing results. And when I went up there the first time to meet him, It was in the middle of a storm. He was up in San Jose, and I didn't get up there till the evening. Knocked on the door, and he invited me in. I sat down on the couch with this doctor and turned off the lights. We played classical music for about half an hour. And, the first thing he said to me is like, "You're from another planet, aren't you?" Well, I said, "I don't know about that, but I'm fascinated about your work and what you're doing." And then a knock came on the door, and this woman came in with her daughter. And the daughter, she heard that he was doing some healing work with these crystals. And the daughter had like a protrusion on her ankle, went out about 3/4 of an inch. And as I sat on the couch with this doctor sitting next to me, Marcel did this thing with the breath and the crystal, and it actually dematerialized in front of our eyes, which inspired me. Is like, wow, this man has figured out something about the structure of matter and interfacing it with consciousness. So anyway, I went to the mines and gathered, thousands of crystals, and we started cutting these crystals for, he did anyway, for these medical doctors. And when he left IBM, he invited me to be a research associate, and IBM gave him the electron microscope that he built from scratch, and we set up a full-on laboratory, Psychic Research Incorporated. I helped procure some of the lab equipment, like more surplus and things like that. I have a good electronics background, so I was able to get all the stuff going, spectrophotometers and stuff. The full-on, very scientific, no dancing in the moonlight with crystals or anything like that. So what we discovered was that, and this was way before Dr. Emoto's work, where thoughts would form, love and then hate. You have a distortion with the hate, and you have these perfect, beautiful, symmetrical patterns happening. They're hexagonal, and it's interesting the correlations between the primary research in the lab was working with water and quartz. And with water, it's interesting that in Antarctica, they did these deep core samples of water, that frozen cores, that when they looked at the geometry of the structures in it, they found that all the 7 major classes of clusterography, all the different geometries that are in nature, are revealed in water, which represents that water acts as like a universal resonance form. In other words, it'll resonate with anything and pattern it.
Right.
And it shares a similar tetrahedral hexagonal structure that quartz does as well. But obviously there's 4 states of water. We know there's liquid, there's steam, and there's a solid ice. And the 4th state is a liquid crystal, which means that it's conveying information. In other words, it's structured with a pattern of some sort. With the quartz crystal, obviously, it is only in one state, in a crystalline state. But there are some interesting relationships between the two. Both are, tetrahedral. Both grow 6-sided. The quartz grows in a vortex. It is a spiral. The energy coming up. That's why some crystals are left-handed spiral, some are right-handed spiral. You can tell by the facets on which way the spiral is going. The angle that the quartz grows is at about 52 degrees, which is the same exact angle as the Great Pyramid in Egypt. And if you look at the intermolecular bonding angles of water, they're exactly half, which is 26 degrees, and 104, about 104.5, and in that area it's about double of 52. So there's some form of angular harmonic resonance that happens in exchange of information between the water and the quartz. And he was able to substantiate this,
Mm-hmm.
scientifically, and even practically. There was a winery in Northern California that had this rot gut wine, and he was able to take the crystal and put the now the quartz has an ability to store information like holographically within it, and keep that information. And water can store information as well. In fact, we measured on the spectrophotometer between 3,000 and 4,000 angstroms. When you just hold, this is way before Dr. Emoto's work, when you pulse your breath into the water with an intention, you can see the valence bands change, showing that thought interfaces with the water, and it
Right.
changes the molecular structure. So, so what he did with the wine was he took the wine with 7 right-hand turns going around the crystal, and was able to restructure thousands of gallons of this terrible wine to turn it into a California award-winning wine. The trouble is we were trying to get extra money for the laboratory, but what are you going to say? A certain wine and everything is like crystal structured,
Right.
Doesn't really fly in the wine world, but it's fascinating when you look at the structure. Some of the ancient occult writings, talking about the very beginning of creation, talk about this hexagonal matrix where the 6 points, and there's a 7th point which is in the center. Pythagoras, way before the Star of David, they talked about the star of creation, which is a 6-pointed star with a dot in the center, and the dot represents the coming together of the male and female triad, or positive negative. With a quartz crystal, if you squeeze it mechanically, you'll get a high voltage off of it. That's how little butane lighters work. They have a little hammer that hits the crystal, and it makes a big electric arc, because what happens is you have trillions of these little 6-pointed stars, and the charge centers, the positive and negative, are perfectly balanced in the center. And when you displace them slightly, it creates this enormous multiplied voltage that comes out. So,
right, like piezoelectric charge, is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, exactly.
Right. And, there's a question here, Dan. I just wanted to, there's somebody, Mirthling, was asking about, I guess with Vogel's videos, he says that smoky quartz is great for radiation pulling, canceling. Have you experimented with that at all?
I have a friend in the Netherlands that was doing some work with that, and when Marcel was over there, using smoky quartz to pull radiation out. I have not had any experience in that particular area, so I can't really speak to it very well. But yeah, the smoky quartz is caused by radiation damage. That's what causes it. So it's kind of interesting. Sometimes like cures like, right?
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
So, and you think about this hexagonal structure, and you think about the flower of life, which is basically, a hexagonal pattern of all these points. There was something about this hexagonal pattern that seems to be fundamental. And, in the work of Nassim Haramein, looking at the 64 tetrahedral grid that he's developed, that seems to fit perfectly with the rest of this understanding. And, you go back, you got the 64 hexagrams of the I Ching, you've got ancient Mayan information talking about the 64, and there's all these little tidbits here and there, like a lost ancient knowledge of understanding the structure of the matrix and how it interfaces with consciousness.
Yeah, it's very, very fascinating. I think I might have told you this before last time you were on the show, but I think you're familiar with the gem elixirs and vibrational healing, the books that were out back in the day. One was by Garudas, but it talks about how we program the water and we actually can transmit the energy from the crystal into the water and create these elixirs. And of course, they still sell them today. Are you familiar with those?
What are they called again?
Well, gem elixirs. Basically, you're just taking the crystal.
Sure. Oh, yeah. Of course, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Right. I figured you would be because it just seems to dovetail right into all of this information. And once again, transmitting energy and also kind of like the energy signature of the vibration of the crystal itself into the water would be very unusual. I'm sure it would amplify.
It makes perfect sense, because it, one thing that Marcel used to say all the time is that, the sciences that we're studying that are out of the box, sort of sciences are akin to the laws of physics that we know. And, my background is, as a broadcast engineer working in electronics in the government for a long time. And I understand antenna theory and wave propagation and phased arrays and how they work. And, when you look at a crystal, just like, you look at HARP, up there in Alaska, that's basically a phased array. What it does is when you have one antenna element, you space the right spacing between the next one and then duplicate another one. Every time you get like a 3 dB amplification, you put a whole bunch of them together, you get an enormous amplification. And this may be why the ancients in different cultures that are totally diverse and separated in time gave this attribute that the quartz amplified. There's something. It's like a phased array antenna, so to speak, of all these trillions and trillions of tetrahedral structures that are aligned. That the energy is vortexing through, and it seems like the vortex is a key element in dimensional transference from one dimension into the next. It seems to have a and it's interesting, that experience I had with the ET and the sphere and the star tetrahedron thing. Many years later, you find out the work of Richard Hoagland and things at 19.47 degrees. All the planets and the sun and all the major spherical bodies in the universe have this the star tetrahedral structure inside the sphere. And then, of course, the Russians discovered the dodecahedron grid, and there was an isosahedron grid, interfaced into that. And where these different frequency grid structures interconnect to each other at the points, the vertices, the energy spirals there. There's a spiraling effect, and it appears to be the dimensional shift from one frequency into the other.
Makes sense.
So, yeah. Anyway,
I didn't mean to distract you. I was just saying it's very, very interesting, though, how that formulates. And of course, what comes to mind with me is the Merkaba, because I'm very big on the Merkaba and light body, and I think you understand this language very well, considering your multidimensional states of consciousness. I have to say you're a very brilliant person. I'm sure you've been told this, but it's really very, it's just really a pleasure to have you on tonight, because you're very, very intelligent. All these different areas that you come from in science and mysticism and consciousness, it just formulates such a beautiful, beautiful combination of information.
It all fits together, doesn't it?
It certainly does. Yeah.
And you have little tidbits here and there that are like talking to you, saying that, oh, look at this fits with this, and this fits with this. But we're brought into this indoctrinated reality of what science is and everything, that we have to do our homework on our own to try to put the pieces together. One thing I worked on when we were working in the laboratory was this very fascinating device. Speaking of angular harmonic resonance, between the 52-degree angle of the quartz and the resonant molecular structure of the water, of being half and twice that. In electronics, the same thing happens. If you have an antenna and you're broadcasting on, let's say, 10 megahertz, okay, you're going to have harmonics on 20 megahertz, which will be half that half the wavelength. And then you'll have a subharmonic that will be on 5 hertz, which is half of 10. So it is the same, what Marcel was saying, fits with the science.
Mm-hmm.
And the angular resonance seems to be a key in what they term as radionic or psychotronic or
Mm-hmm.
whatever you want to call it type of instruments, where you have these dials, and the dials represent an angular resonance that act as a tuning focus for the mind.
Mm-hmm.
The most fascinating, I've worked on a number of different types of radionic instruments. The most fascinating one I worked on was one we imported from England that was built in the 1950s by George and Marjorie Deloire, that was patented by the European Patent Office. And you can, if you go to marcelvogel.org, you can see the patent and the pictures of the instrument and actual photographs from it, where it stood about 5.5 feet tall. It was an amazing piece of work. I had all these amazing brass dials and everything, and you would line this thing up with magnetic north, and it had these oscillators inside of it. And what it would do is you could take you could take a blood spot or a hair from somebody, because it contains the fractal harmonic resonance of, in this holographic world that we live in, no matter where you are in the universe, it can link to you.
Correct.
And so what you do is you tune the dials, and it's like this resonance. It's like if you were to make a circle, and a circle has infinite number of sides, and you were to tune on that circle. It's interesting that they do the circles in 360 degrees, which is based on a 6-sided structure. Every 30 degrees, 90 degrees, and then you have 120, then 180 degrees, and it goes all the way around. It's based on that type of structure. You would, with this instrument, tune into them, and then the energy would oscillate and go up to this cavity above, where it would have these reflectors and lenses, and reflect the energy back onto this photographic plate. And I was working with 2 other scientists. The job that we had was to try to take this technology that worked, that was able to make tens of thousands of photographs, patented by the European Patent Office, and converted into, at the time it was 1980s, electronic technology. So that's what we were attempting to do. What George Deloire was able to do was take a lot of photographs of people at a distance in different parts of their body and tune into that. And is even able to go, this is the only instrument that I ever saw that could go backwards and forwards into time. It had a time spiral, and there's a photograph of a fetus and a mother that was about 50 miles away when he took the picture, and he was able to progress the time spiral to see the different levels of gestation of the, in the mother's womb. And this for that machine to work completely verifies the fact that we are living in essentially a hologram.
Right.
And that time and space are an element of that fractal hologram that we live in. So anyway, it's a very, very fascinating project we're working on.
Oh yeah. Well, I love radionics. I've worked with those before. What frequencies were you guys using for that? Do you remember?
Well, the tone oscillators, I remember when we blueprinted the entire instrument, I was taking measurements, and I was the one that discovered that the cavities in which the tone oscillators, it was, this is 1950s technology,
Amazing.
It was like real primitive, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so they had these vibrators inside there. And the cavities in which were in there were golden mean ratio harmonics. In other words, 1.618, the golden mean, which is all throughout nature and everything, that has an aspect that can go into infinity. Going into infinity is the nature of the matrix. It seems like the the nature of the matrix goes into the micro and the macro into infinity holographically.
Right.
One thing that Marcel said that always stuck with me, and I thought he was being kind of conspiratorial. This was in the 1980s. I didn't have any idea about anything. I was very naive, right?
Right.
He said, if we ever discover something really significant here in the laboratory, the government would come in and clean out our lab if we had a breakthrough. And, many years later, I've met with, for 10 years, I traveled the planet meeting with scientists and inventors. And that's what happens. The labs, they come in and they clean out your lab. They take out everything. And so he was right.
Right. And let me ask you something. We obviously know why they do these things because, first of all, they probably don't want people to be immortalized or be able to heal through various frequencies, wouldn't you say? So is it just about trying to keep people sick, controlled, or manipulated, or is there something else going on?
It's a whole nother level of. It's amazing when you dig into it about how the entire world got hijacked, and how I was going to go into another subject, but because that one goes into a whole deep one, I was going to go into a little bit later on the show.
Okay.
But we wanted to touch on Atlantis a little bit, and since we're on the crystal aspect. I knew this doctor. His name is Dr. Ray Brown, and he was a naturopathic doctor, and he was also a treasure hunter, and he was diving off the coast of Bimini, and it was storm hit, and the sands exposed. He was deep underwater and exposed this pyramid, and the pyramid had incredible polished sides and looked like a crystalline apex at the top. And he found an entrance into it. He swam into it, and the room, he said, seemed to be illuminated from some unknown source. And in the center of the room was a pedestal with these two silver hands that looked like they were blackened, like an enormous energy was happening. And there was this quartz sphere, speaking of quartz again, and it was a very unusual quartz sphere because inside the quartz sphere was this little grid of triangular pyramids inside of it. It's almost impossible to do with the current technology that we have to try to reproduce something like this. Around this was 7 chairs. One was higher than the other. Coming down from the ceiling of the pyramid was this golden rod that came about within a couple of inches of it, and it had a red pointed crystal pointing at it. So if you can picture this, you have these 7 chairs, almost as though the one chair that was taller was like the leader of the group, so to speak, to direct it. And it appears that during the time of Atlantis, they may have had technologies that the group was putting, you can only speculate, but it appears to be like a consciousness interface between the ones that are surrounding this crystal and the crystal that was apparently, with the rod coming down and everything and the energy, apparently coupling into this massive pyramid structure. And now that we know that, there's a grid system all over the planet and people are discovering pyramids all over the place, Antarctica and deep in the oceans and all over the place, that it may have connected into this grid in some way to interface into it. Anyway, I took a photograph of it. He displayed it a couple of times. I set up on trumped up some charges and threw him in prison for a while. I didn't make any really money with it or anything like that. But I found it quite interesting that such a incredible find once again kind of indicates that the quartz has some form of interface with consciousness.
Right. Yeah, well, we are crystalline. We are carbon into silicon as far as our molecular structure goes. I'm very clear that because we have the constructs of water, which is really about programming and consciousness, we convert into more of a compatible, what we call machine-based technology to some degree, a natural symbiotic machine. So it doesn't surprise me. It really doesn't. I think that this is fascinating. I was going to ask you, where exactly was the pyramid located? I know it was off of where?
Oh, that in the Bermuda Triangle.
It was over there. Okay. Yeah, I believe there was an article. They did kind of talk about this for a while, didn't they? Then they shoved it under the carpet?
He was on In Search of with the host Leonard Nimoy, and Dr. Vogel worked with Ray Brown, and an incredible energy was coming off this thing. It was like huge ionic energy was shooting off the top of this. It was a very unusual artifact that he gathered. Anyway, it was interesting.
Well, what happened to the artifact? Where is it now?
Well, Ray Brown died, and this fellow up in Sedona was taking care of it. He called it the Atlantean orb or something. And I heard some story. I don't know if it's true or not. I can't believe it that somehow it slipped and dropped and it broke. It just sounds insane. But if anybody knows the full story on that, I haven't followed up. But it is no longer in his hands. So
That's
amazing. Seems like something they would want to get their hands on.
Right, a private collector comes to mind, or maybe just sold it to the highest bidder. That's fascinating. I would love to see that. Now, there are pictures of this on the website, correct?
Yeah, if you go to marcelvogel.org, there's photos I took of it, and it has a triangular pyramid right in the middle of it. It was only the size of a tennis ball, not very large. Mm-hmm. But the pedestal and the silver hands that were holding it, they were like blackened. He said, like intense energy was going through it.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting. Yeah. Do you remember what they said? How large that pyramid was, or what the estimate of the pyramid was, insofar as how big it was underwater?
It was larger than the Great Pyramid. It doesn't hit the mainstream media. You see little blips come out every so often, like French and American scientists go in there, and they found look like ancient Mayan, type of architecture and stuff. Very Atlantean. Mm-hmm. So that's about all the information I have on that.
I'm wondering why they haven't pursued investigating that pyramid, or they tried to deliberately cover it up. But technically speaking, why aren't people out there trying to get back to that pyramid?
You'd think, yeah. Mm-hmm.
I'd love to go excavate out there, or try to get in there and see what I could find.
Yeah. Apparently the sand shifted when they this is before GPS and everything, right. So it'd be a hard one to find.
How did he pick it up to begin with? I mean, how did he locate it? Was he just kind of diving somewhere?
Well, there was a team of, he was like a team of 7 divers, mm-hmm. and the other 6 all mysteriously died. Mm. There was a terrible storm, and the storm apparently pushed the sands and covered some of this underwater structures and things.
Wow, how did the other guys die? Was there a storm?
Kind of mysteriously, they all die. It's funny, all of them at the same time heard this voice when he took it, and he said, "Now you've got what you've come for. You must now leave and never return," type of thing, so.
Mm-hmm. That's pretty wild.
It is pretty wild.
Well, does it ever give you the idea that, what is this guy's background? I mean, Ray Brown, what was his background? Was he government intel or anything like that?
No, not at all. Not at all. He was like a naturopathic doctor.
Okay, so he wasn't anybody who had any contracts with covert intel or government or anything like that? No. Just curious.
They trumped up some fake charges and threw him in jail for some time. Apparently, they didn't want him talking about it,
Mm-hmm. Well, that's usually their tactic, isn't it? So what is your impression of the crystal skulls?
Well, Marcel this is speculation. We don't know, but he believed, because Marcel was an expert. He was the one that developed magnetic coding on hard drives. He was working with IBM. He was their head scientist on ways of memory storage. And so this is perfect what he got into, with
Right.
the quartz, because it basically stores on a much higher level and multidimensional. He believed that in ancient times the adept would bring in the new initiate and was able to transfer his knowledge into the, you talk about form resonance. You have a skull that's shaped like a human skull, and it stores information, just like, Heinrich Hertz discovered and Tesla discovered, and then is able to transfer that into the new initiate. So that's speculation, but
it makes sense.
Than that, I don't know.
Right, it makes a lot of sense, though. It's a transfer of consciousness. They do it today with synthetic telepathy and other forms of EEG heterodyning and cloning. So it doesn't surprise me. Was Marcel Vogel ever harassed by covert intelligence, or was he ever tracked by MIBs? I know you mentioned that he said he was concerned about getting people, visits from whoever.
He never shared that with me. We did a lot of things together. We toured the Lawrence Livermore labs and went to look through all those stuff. And he never mentioned anything like that. But
that's good.
When after we did the National Press Club back in 2001, I naively thought, wow, we've got these technologies. I naively thought, this is going to be a world-changing event. Look at the 22 cameras in the back row. We're disclosing that, we have faster-than-light craft that's been developed, where we have solutions to get off of nuclear oil and coal, and everything else. 57 different species, bases on the other side of the moon, nukes being shut down, so forth and so on. Every testimony except for mine probably was, mine was about the extraterrestrial or whatever they were coming out of the ocean, and official secret reports from the Navy coming out of the oceans. And each one of us said we'd be willing to testify under oath before Congress. CBS came in, of course CNN completely sanitized it, and interviewed me, and I said, look, I will not do this interview unless I can say, we've got the scientists, and I can prove that we got a solution to get off of nuclear oil and coal and non-polluting, and they promised up and down. Just a very short little 10-second statement. It's not going to take up a lot of time, and it's kind of significant to the world. But the producer, she was almost in tears. They said, I know I promised, but the higher executives, and we know today, the CIA controls, and they are the higher executives. And Daniel Sheehan, one of the witnesses that joined me, showed me a document of 42 CIA NSA executives that are in high media positions to absolutely control and maintain, this type of stuff. So,
well, aren't they the ones that are overseeing a lot over there at Area 51 as well, and other areas besides that one? The CIA?
I'm sorry. Say again, Solaris?
Isn't the CIA overseeing what's going on around Area 51 these days too?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
After our government lost control in 1956 because Eisenhower needed plausible deniability, and he had Nelson Rockefeller restructure MJ-12 and the CIA operation. They moved all their operations out of Wright-Patterson, moved it over to Area 51 and S4, and every single president after they murdered Kennedy has been out of the loop, and that's what caused the Disclosure Project. Was that CIA directors, presidents, heads of intelligence were all being denied access because they basically created this secret government within the government that has no accountability, has no access, no oversight whatsoever. that is, you look at the new secret space program whistleblowers that are coming out. The one that I am most impressed with is William Tompkins, who worked with the Navy, who has substantial hundreds of documents to prove that what he was involved with, as well as Dr. Ryan. Trying to remember his name. Anyway, he was an expert at authenticating the documents. You can tell I'm tired tonight.
That's okay. You're doing fine. Thanks.
And he was actually working at the McDonnell Douglas place where he was working, where the Nordic extraterrestrials was assisting the Navy to try to catch up, where they had 29 German spies embedded in the Nazi industrial military complex to try to see what they were doing. Because the Nazis, we had anti-gravity in 1954. We had developed it, but the FBI came in and confiscated the whole thing and suppressed it. The Nazis had developed anti-gravity back in the 1930s, so we were trying to play catch-up with them. And at the end of the World War II, the Nazis had this plan, which successfully carried it out, to infiltrate into the United States with all their assets. And it was called Weltanschauungskrieg, which means worldview warfare. And in 1946, Rockefeller Foundation completely controlled the education, rewrote what actually happened at the end of World War II. And it's kind of interesting. Otis Carr developed what was called the Ultron, and he was the protege of Nikola Tesla, who understood anti-gravity and relayed it onto him. Not only that, but it's the geometry of the craft. The geometry of the craft was interfaced with the occupants inside so that the consciousness directed the craft. This is something that is, according to the new secret space program whistleblowers, the Viral, the girls of the Viral that was working, the German occultists rather, that later worked with the SS in their own secret space program, they were also piloting the craft through consciousness. And if you look back in General Twining, who recommended to Truman that we needed to have the MJ-12 government within a government, his first report was talking about, looking at the retrieved craft, that they didn't have meters and levers, knobs, and switches and everything to control. You just put your hands on these plates, and the pilot would have the symbiotic relationship, and the craft would actually be resonating with the consciousness of the pilot, and they would act as one. So this whole thing of consciousness and geometry, it's kind of interesting. Back in I think it was back in the 80s when I was studying all this geometry stuff. There was the case with the Myers case with Billy Myers, the Swiss farmer who was making contact with these beings that were saying they were coming from the Pleiades, and giving crystal and metal samples. Well, I actually handled those samples when I was working with Marcel, and we was looking at it through the electron microscope and discovered it was a cold fusion process that couldn't be duplicated anywhere on Earth. One of the scientists that was working with NASA and worked with the computer graphics and was doing the analysis with Colonel Wendell Stevens on the Palladian craft, I gave him the mathematics of what I believed the craft would be, which was based on the golden mean and the square root of 3. And he came back, and I was honored in the back of the book that the mathematics that I gave him matched exactly to the craft, and
nice.
And I contributed to a unified field theory of geometry. And I had no idea. Information. We're all able to pull information in, and sometimes pieces come in. Who knows how they come in?
Well, cellular recall, perhaps. I don't know. multidimensional scale. That's wonderful. But it doesn't surprise me that you were able to do that.
Yeah, yeah, it's little tidbits and pieces,
Right.
that put together this incredible thing. But they've been working on the perception management of this ever since the end of World War II. The education, the media, the mainstream, Operation Mockingbird, and all this stuff has been controlling our matrix of perception, and even in the powers of consciousness. The Professor Isaac in London talking about 30 universities, a conspiracy to remove what they knew about the powers of human consciousness, and they removed that from all the books. So there's been this orchestrated effort, and you look at, today we have only 5 corporations that control everything you see and hear in the mainstream media, and the alternative media, thanks to shows like yours. Snowden's leaked up thousands of documents, a lot of them on the GCHQ over in the UK, talking about all the different methods that they're doing. They're attempting to do perception management control on the alternative media by trolls, shills, and puppets, and all the special software, and how to discredit people. And what they do is, there's a lot of good information out there, but there's a lot of disinformation, and who knows how many sites the CIA controls and throws stuff in it. So what it does is, it has this effect where people look at all this different information, and some of it's conflicting and different sources, and some of it just sounds too outlandish. And what happens is, the average person on the street just, it doesn't know what to believe, and so they just kind of shut down. And so that works for them, because people aren't putting it together. But I always like to refer as to the rock salt foundation that I like to work on. Is, it's really hard to fake 500 military intelligence witnesses that have supporting documentation, and you have all these leaked documents that have been authenticated that completely support what these witnesses are saying. And if you go by that as your solid foundation, and then start to piece it together, what I happen to do was, back in 2014, a media company out of Hollywood wanted me to write an article on media control. I used to be an ABC newsman, so I was kind of shocked at how the media completely, very carefully made it sound like, oh, we got 500 witnesses. Well, 450 at the time. Now there's over 500. They want to have a congressional hearing on reality of UFOs.
And Dan, we're going to hold that thought. We're going to have our break. Everybody, please stay tuned. You're listening to Ravenstar's Witching Hour. My special guest is Dan Willis. We'll be right back. Stay tuned.